Our next speaker is Dr. Anna Johnson. Dr. Johnson, Moral Professor Anna Johnson, has been on faculty of the Department of Animal Science since 2005 and is an international livestock welfare expert. Over her career, Anna has worked with pigs, beef, dairy, laying hens, sheep, and broiler birds. Her research areas have addressed housing systems, humane handling techniques, human-animal interactions, pain mitigation, humane euthanasia, transportation, livability, and environmental enrichment. Please help me welcome Anna Johnson to the stage.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay? Perfect. I was just cracking open a Diet Coke, nothing unfortunately harder than that. Okay, well, thank you very much for having me here today. It's a great day. There are lots of great information that is shared, and I'm hoping that I can add to that information. We're going to pivot away from nutrition and water and step more into animal behavior, which is my passion and something I'm very excited to share with you today. So I'm going to focus in on enrichment and talk through maybe an option we can consider using on our farms. So I'll very quickly talk about, well, what is enrichment? What do we mean by that? And then we'll go into two studies that we completed last year, one at the Gilt Development Unit and one in open pen gestation, and then maybe some take-home messages for you to kind of thinking about this, about how maybe this could apply back on the farm. So the first thing is, well, what do we mean by environmental enrichment? There is a really great definition here that was presented by Ruth Newberry back in 1995. And it's really the consideration of environmental modifications to improve the biological functioning of captive animals. And the key thing in here is biological. So as we think about environmental enrichment on our farms, what is biologically relevant to the animal or the animals that we are working with? So kind of keep that piece of information in the back of your mind as we work through today's talk. What do we mean by enrichment as well? Well, we can place those into 5 main categories. And so the US gets a really bad rep from other regions of the world when we talk about environmental enrichment. And I've heard myself from colleagues from other regions of the world that the US has 0 environmental enrichment on the farms. And that's actually a false statement out of the bat, because the very first category is social enrichment. So if you think about your farms, your pigs are grouped housed or have pigs next to them if they're in stalls, right? Breeding stalls or gestation stalls. So that social enrichment is the animal to animal, but it's also the animal to the human being as well. And we're in our barns every day checking pigs and interacting with our pigs. So that would be a concept of social enrichment. So we for sure are doing a good job in that space. Another area that we can consider enriching would be through senses, that sensory enrichment. So again, what's the main sense that the pig uses? So as we all know, they're very oral, nasal, facial, everything. I call them my big babies. Everything goes into their mouth. That's how they investigate and learn and explore and interact with the environment around them. Then we have the physical concept here. So this would be, can we change the size of our enclosures that we have those animals in? Or can we change the things that we put into that environment? So some of our very large open pen gestation systems that we have will sometimes put those interpartitional walls in there to give those animals the ability to have smaller subgroupings within that space. And then the next two, I think, is where most people lean into, nutritional enrichment. So it's not just giving the food. We give very good food. We give a very high quality, well-balanced, nutritionally balanced food. But the concept here is, can you provide it maybe at certain times in the pig's life where they struggle in a more exciting way? So we know that transitional weaned pig can struggle. Some of those pigs, not all of them, can fall behind in that first week or so. So can we present it in a fun way, such as in a feed ball or in a cube or in something that they can break down, interact, and start to understand, oh, this is what I now need to eat instead of where's my mama? And I think occupational is honestly where a lot of our customers and consumers, when they are thinking about environmental enrichment and enrichment on the farm, this is where they lean into. They're not leaning into that social or that sensory. They're leaning into toys. They're leaning into things that we can give to the pig for them to work, manipulate, and do. So just be thinking about sometimes who we're talking to. Sometimes their perceptions of enrichment can also vary. So what I'm going to spend time in today is in the occupational, which is the object, and I'm going to share a couple of things that we did. But before we go into this, environmental enrichment, remember, can cut across every species that we work and interact with. So laboratory animal research have done a lot in enrichment, and in the guide and in the Animal Welfare Act, there is components and pieces that direct us about using environmental enrichment. You can see the horse is a combo, so that's an occupational and a nutritional enrichment, right? So it doesn't have to be one or the other. Sometimes these enrichment categories can blend together. We have to think about the animal, we have to think about the biology, the biologically relevant, we have to think about the types, and the other thing we have to think about is, well, where does that type then fit? So DEFRA, this is something from the UK, from my old country, they will actually begin categorizing enrichment into these three categories. So the first one can be this optimal, that's the ideal thing for said animal, all the way down, stair-stepping down to marginal interest. And you can see for our pig, who I've noted is very oral nasofacial, they love to chew and investigate and break down and consume. That is the pig, okay? If we were talking about broilers, they are driven by vision. They see in the UV. Their foraging is directed by pecking, and they want things that are going to be moving to direct that vision for them to be interested in pecking, consuming, and so on. Straw, however, does tend to get thrown out all the time in these discussions, but here in America, North America, our systems are not set up for deep-bedded packed straw systems, okay? Hoop buildings, fine, okay? Indoor, outdoor pasture, different. But for where we play, the space we play in, where most of our pigs are kept, that is not going to be an option for us, okay? So we have to think broader and more smart about what we can put in that's going to be practical, economical, biosecurity, we need to consider that, right? As well as something that would still maintain some interest for that pig. So that's where we started to think about, well, where could we go? We looked at the previous research that had been out there, and you can see that there is a lot of different things that have been tried. I would say that the neonate and our poor boars in our boar studs have been the least looked at. I think there's some real mileage in that. People always forget about the boys. But there's been a lot of work in that non-breeding side, so nursery, wean to finish, and then a little bit more now in lactating sows and now our G sows as well. And when you start comparing and contrasting some of these studies that have been done, there are some really useful impacts on animal welfare, on swine welfare. So reductions of aggression are coming through, shifting those behavioral repertoires to support more natural but positive type behaviors, improving gait scores and lameness in turn, right? So there's some really attractive things when we start thinking about environmental enrichment that can also have some improvements for that individual pig. So that leads us to our first project. I would like to give, obviously, recognition to my co-authors on this, Dr. Millman, Genschel, and Kearns. Miss Bebb, or Mrs. Bebb, is now working for JBS, so she could not be here to present today, but the work I'm presenting is her master's platform. So the first one we're going to look into is the GDU. So the objective of this work was to look at providing an enrichment toy, so occupational environmental enrichment, to these very important animals in our production system. The replacement gilt, we want to baby, and we want to get a very good, selected, robust gilt so that we have a nice pipeline to be able to move them back and over into the sow farm. For interest of time, I'm only going to cherry pick out results today to present, because she presented for 50 minutes and I've only got 25 today. So I'll just pull out a few things to share with you. So here are some of the homework or the background of where the animals were. 8 to 10 week at entry, here in Iowa, commercial multiplication unit. We felt it was really important and prudent to test these toys in commercial spaces. It's harder sometimes to translate from a small university study out into the commercial space. H-barns, about 64 gilts in a pen, and then you can see the feeders and the drinkers that were provided to these girls. For the enrichment device, you can see that it looked exactly like it does on that slide in the top corner. It's blue. The one for the sows is a green color. So with this particular company, they have different sizes of toy, all the way from that suckling pig, nursery. This one would be more the finisher, so it would fit with our gilts. And then the sows are a little bit larger, robust, and heavier as well. But they all look the same. They have this like central component on the toy, and then 12 legs that project out so that the animal can get purchase on them, as you can see here in this lower picture. The setup for this one and for the sows, for the OPG, was 3 treatments. So we had toy pens, and we used the manufacturer's advice as well of 1 toy to 15 animals. I think there's still some research in that space of is that ratio correct, but that is what we went with because that was the information that we had to hand. And so the next one would be called the neighbor pen. So those individuals or those pigs in that pen, they could get purchase on that toy if it would be rolled up and connected to or stuffed under that interconnecting divider of between the 2 pens, but not as easily to be able to pick them up and run around with them like in the toy pen, which they did. And then the control animals is exactly that. That would be how our GDUs normally would be, right? So they wouldn't be able to really see, and certainly would have no purchase on those toys. So for the animal-based measures that we took, we leaned into the PQA Plus site assessment and collected lots of different things that we would look like severe scratches. We would look for wounds and abscesses and so on. We also lent into some nice measures that Kate Dewey from 2018 used as well. And we collected these on a yes-no basis. So they either had a wound or they didn't. We didn't count the number of wounds or the number of scratches. It was either yes or no. So a binary type concept. And then we collected this. Week 0 was day of placement, and then week 4 and week 8 accordingly. And to make sure we didn't double count a gilt, once we had gone into the pens and we had moved around, and if we found a gilt that had a animal-based measure, once we had completely collected everything from her, we marked her with a spray so we didn't double count. So here are the measures running down the left-hand side with the definitions for you. The 2 in red is what we took from Kate Dewey's work. So this would be that crinkled ear, and then, of course, the swollen ears leading into that cauliflower ear as well. So the first table is descriptive. This is just simply a count of what we saw. So to orientate you to what I'm looking, do I have a Do I have a little thingy-bobby on here? Matt, do I have a laser? Oh, I do have a laser. Thank you. I went into English, a thingy-bobby. I'm sorry. Do we have a laser? Okay, so time points here, week 0, 4, and 8. And then underneath each week, we have our treatments. So T for toy, N for neighbor, C for control, the number of gilts running accordingly. And then our measures are running down the side here. Just to show you the main ones that were coming through, abscesses were pretty low, but were the third highest, I suppose. And then open wounds and severe scratches were the other top animal-based measures that we saw. These make sense to me because these gilts had come from a nursery, they had been transported, they were being sorted, they were being placed into pens. And so open wounds and severe scratches are typically those animal-based measures that one would see. But when we cast our eye across and start looking at the treatments, although interestingly severe scratches are much lower in our control girls than they were in the other ones, over the weeks they are decreasing, and there wasn't really a super reduction compared to those in that toy, neighbor, and control pen descriptively. But then we started to do some statistics. So when we then compared our toy pen compared to our neighbor and our control, we do see for the number of wounds that the toy gilts had a significantly lower number of wounds collectively over the 3 time points. In between was our neighbor, and then our control gilts had the highest number of open wounds. So that was very attractive to be able to see that. Looking at just time points, regardless of treatment, looking at open wounds, again, we have that stair step down from 4 to 8. Makes perfect sense because those gilts have been placed longer, their hierarchy has been sorted, and they have settled into that group dynamics. So to take away the overall on this GDU, the good thing was with this GDU, it's a really well-run GDU. So the animal-based measures overall were very low. So that was really good to see because, again, these replacement gilts are so very important. Open wounds were lower in our toy treatment. They were the only animal-based measure that was significantly lower. We did look at the others, but they were not significant or were so low in prevalence that we couldn't run them. The reason why we picked swollen ears and cauliflower ears, although what I showed you, they were very low in this table, we were curious and looking around. There was a non-select pen in every single barn, independent of this study. They didn't have the toy, but as these gilts came in, they were automatically identified as being non-selects. And so those non-selects are never going to be considered to go to the sow farm. And so the reason we put in cauliflower ear and the swollen ear for our treatment was because we saw a very high prevalence of swollen ears and hematomas in, swollen ears and cauliflower ears in that other area. So we are maybe suggesting that this may be a useful two useful animal-based measures that may need to be considered in our future tweaks to our on-farm site assessments as well as our third-party auditing protocols as well. So overall, the Easy Fix Luna for replacement gilts, it showed some promise in the wound category, at least from an animal-based measure. We would also note that it fitted in well within the system. The animals did use them. I'm not showing the behavior work here. We didn't do behavior work here. We did it for some of the sows work. And the other really attractive thing for this was, although they had perches and they did chew on those legs, they were not damaged to the point of not being able to be reused. So we purchased 64 Luna toys. We were able to clean them, and then we were able to cycle them right back in. So, of course, you're going to get more groups, which means your return on investment is better for you. Okay, stepping into the sows really quickly. Again, thanking Deirdre, Millman, Genschel, Scott, and Kearns for their help. This time we were looking at the same toy, for sows, so it would be a different color toy, but looking at their availability of having it for the first 4 days when we first mix those sows, which we know traditionally that's where aggression spikes up as they again are settling into that group system. So again, here are some of the sort of directional points as it relates to the study. Commercial sow farm, OPG, fed once a day, average parity was just around 2. Here's the change in color, and you can see one of the sows here has got perches on one of our toys and is chewing on it. And I think I failed to mention with the gilts that the product is made up of food grade natural rubber, so it is okay for the animals to have access to this. The way that we framed this was that the animals were in individual breeding stools. They were then confirmed pregnant by the farm at about 35 days, and then that's when they would be enrolled into our study. The caretaker for the breeding and gestation, the lead, would go through and help Deirdre to identify by body condition score how they were going to take 13 sows from the breeding line and mix them and place them into a open pen gestation. We had the same treatments. The treatments were the toy, the neighbor, and the control. We also took the same animal-based measures, although we did tweak severe scratches, and we've tweaked the scratches in this one a little bit. Again, it was a yes-no basis, and we collected these animal-based measures on day 1. So this was before they moved into the OPG. This was done in the breeding stools, and then on day 4, 4 days after mixing. So the one in red is just where that slight difference is gone. So in the PQA, we do severe scratches, right? So that's 25% or more of the animal's body has scratches. Here, what we decided to do was to break the sow down into regions. So front region, middle region, and back region. This one we did do some behavior, and I'm going to really showcase more of this one for the sows. So once that last sow had been loaded into that pen, the pen was complete, the gate was shut by the caretaker, and then Deirdre would look for 1 continuous hour, looking at all those animals and watching what they did. And each sow, as they were going in, had an individual mark placed onto her back, 1 through 13, so we knew who was doing what with what. We were interested in the oral, nasal, facial toy interactions, which basically was that the sow had her mouth or her nose touching and interacting with the toy, and we did that continuously. We also were interested in aggressive events. So this was split into 2 pieces, biting and fighting. So biting is exactly what it is. It sounds like is one bite from one sow to another. And fighting could have involved mutual biting. So both sows were going at it together, as well as pushing with their bodies and also head knocking. And then every 5 minutes in that 1 hour scan, so at 9 o'clock and then at 9:05 and then at 9:10, Deirdre would look up and count how many sows were active, how many sows were inactive, and how many sows were interacting with the toy. So we have 13 sows in that pen. So if 5 were active and 5 were interacting with the toy, 3 by default would be inactive. So again, descriptively, looking at some of our animal-based measures here, again, open wounds were relatively low on day 1 for each of the treatments, and that makes sense because they're coming in from the breeding stool. But interestingly, by day 4, almost 100% or 100% of the animals had at least 1 wound, right? And that makes perfect sense because they are fighting. So the toy really didn't decrease that. The open wounds in that first 4-day period. Didn't really get much purchase on that one. This is a busy slide, but I will orientate you to it because it's really kind of cool. So on the right-hand side, we have the parity by shape and color. On the left, you have the number of oral, nasal, facial toy interactions. So each individual sow is shown here 1 through 13 by their pen. So pens 1 through 7. This is only the toy pens that I'm showing you, right? Because neighbors and control don't have the toy interactions. And then we have it by first day, and then we have it by day 4. So as soon as you start looking at this, you immediately start to see that on day 1, 82 sows, or around 91% of those animals, interacted with the toy at least once. Some of them interacted with it a lot more than that, okay? But by day 4, that had significantly, or well, not significantly, but it had gone down. I should say descriptively, it had gone down by about 66-fold. So on day 1, we had a total of 240 toy interactions over those 7 pens and over those girls. And on the 4th day, that had dropped down to 82. When we are looking at the biting and the fighting between days 1 and day 4, there was a 23-fold decrease of biting between days 1 and 4, and a 100% decrease in fighting between the two. And this is independent of treatment. Here we just have a flip-flop, which is really interesting to see. So the percentage of toy interactions between day 1 and day 4 didn't change. That was about 5% of our animals. But there was certainly a flip-flop between active and inactive. So, of course, on that first day, they are loaded, they are active, they are up, they are interacting. And then by day 4, that social hierarchy has occurred and settled and has decreased. But the toy interest hadn't really changed. So numerically, again, the animal-based measures here were very low, indicating good welfare on the farm. We didn't really see any differences going on here with open wounds and scratches, but there certainly was interest by the sows on day 1, with 91% of the sows interacting with the toy. There was a numerical decrease from days 1 to 4 with those ONF toy interactions, maybe becoming less interesting for the animals after 4 days. And of course, there was that flip-flop of active and inactive by day. So where would I place this toy enrichment? Well, I would place the toy enrichment here between suboptimal and marginal. It's not a silver bullet. I don't want to sell it that if you do this, everything is fixed and everything would be okay. That would not be okay to say that. But it is a viable option for us in North America if we are going to be asked by our customers and our consumers that they want to see occupational enrichment into our farms, okay? I think we don't want to leave the toy in there all the time, because I do think that the sows habituate to the toys. We can see that stair step down. But I also think that this toy could have more value on farms which are struggling with higher or worse animal-based measures. So the GDU and the OPG I did were really actually good farms. I think we might get more traction if we were going into farms which had higher incidence of abscesses or higher incidence of wounds or higher incidence of lameness. So I don't want to say it's not fabulous, but I think that there's more work to be done in here, and I think cherry picking maybe the types of farms or maybe different parts of production, we may get more purchase. But it's certainly something to consider in our arsenal and our toolbox. So with that, I will conclude to keep us on time. Thank you.
Any questions for Anna?
Oh, we have one question. It's like church, everyone's way at the back of the room.
Thank you for a good presentation. I don't see many of these. Maybe need to see more. Any ideas on, in my reading on this, pigs like things that are destructible,
exactly,
deformable, in order to sustain the interest in the, and so any ideas on, maybe something that would be more optimal that could be useful and might even be more accepted by our consumers in terms of keeping the pigs engaged and being a longer term or more permanent enrichment?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, and of course we always have to think widely also about cost and biosecurity too, right? I've actually seen some nice work which has actually used wood, but of course wood is a vector and biosecurity, and so we have to be careful with that. We did some work a couple of years ago on actually changing the way we gave the nursery starter feed. Coming from the UK, I call it a biscuit, but we'll call it a cookie. But it's like a bath bomb of sorts. And we made it, we drilled a hole in, we put a rope in there, we hung it over the feeder. And boy, sometimes we were trying to tie it, and those nursery pigs were swinging on it, right? And it helped with that transitional pig. And then the rope became enrichment once the food had gone away. So I think trying to think maybe more smartly in some of those areas is something we should look at. But as I said, I think we can use this, but I think we want to overlay it and put other things in there as well. And I don't know if we have to do it all the way through production either, right? So let's just pick those pinch points, so the transitional pig or mixing, or with sows, the last 3 days before they get loaded up into farrowing, we see vulvar injuries going up because they start nibbling on each other. So instead of doing the whole thing and habituating and they get bored with it, can we be smarter in working with the pig and giving them tools at the times that they need it? That's where I'd like to go and play a little bit more. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the information and the
Of course.
presentation. I'm just wondering, on the toy, was there any effort to address the other senses? Mostly you're thinking of tactile, some form of tactile, but I'm thinking of smell, taste.
Yes.
What about putting a squeaker in it?
Yes, 100% correct. There's actually something called a Porsachew, which is a different toy, and that comes in flavors. So apple flavor, and there's another flavor. I've never chewed it myself to see if it does. I always do this. I'm always like, if the pig's chewing on it, I should probably check it out too.
Do
and
it
I don't
before it
know
gets
how
to the
long
pigs.
What's that?
Do it before you give it to the pig.
I know, I should do that, otherwise I might get very sick. So I don't know if it, A, tastes, and B, how long the taste would last. But I think you're correct. I think that, we've got these other categories of enrichment. How can we take maybe a toy and then overlay that to make it more attractive again for the animal? So I think there's just so much mileage in this space, and we're just scratching the surface here in the States in this area.
And one more question, if
Yes.
I may. I noticed, it may have been just for illustrative purposes, you've set the 3 pens out to explain the relationship with the toy, but was there any possibility of a bias or some sort of a weight to be given to the control pen, that they had access to the behavior of the other 2 pens?
Yes, yeah. That's a great question, and one we didn't really look at the behavior of the control pen and or the neighbor pen to see if we maybe upset them in some way because they could see it but they couldn't access it, at least the neighbor pen. I had one student and she was already living at the farm doing 7 pens, right? But no, I think that's exactly right. Like I think you're probably thinking frustration or issues that way with, if I don't have it but you do, what could there be a knock-on effect? So it's an excellent question, and one I can't answer, but something we should probably look at too. Yeah. Okay.
Thank our speaker.
All right. Thank you.